Hi, my name is Samantha and I'm going to show you how to do binding on a finished quilt. So I'll show you later how to do the quilt, but let's just talk about the binding for now. So we have a small quilt here and you can see I've already squared it up so it's all even, and what I'm going to show you to do is to start the binding. So over here I have the fabric laid out on my cutting mat, and as you can see I have it matched up to the edge here. Everybody likes to do their binding a little bit different. My quilt, if you've noticed, tends to be slightly thinner, so I don't need a real thick binding. I'm going to do a 2-inch binding on this. Sometimes I do 2 1/4 depending on the size, the fatness of my batting. So I'm going to line up my little edge here to the 2-inch mark, and I just make my cut. And I don't think I went all the way through. And there we go. Because unfolded, when I unfold it, I'm going to have 40 inches. This was 20 inches when it was folded. So add up your math, measure out the perimeter of your quilt, and then just do your math and make sure that you've cut enough to go all the way around your quilt, okay? So now I have all my strips. I've cut 6 strips of this fabric. That's probably a little bit more than I need, but I'd rather have more. I can always cut it short. I'm going to take one piece of fabric, and laying it perpendicular, I'm going to face to face with each other just like that. Okay. I like to pin it. Get my little pin cushion out here. And I pin this down so that I'm not slipping and sliding all over the place. There's 1 pin and there's 2 pins. Now, if you're good at this, you can eyeball it, but if this is new for you, I'd recommend that you make a little mark here. So I've taken my little grid ruler and I want to go from corner to corner. Of course, I've got a pin there now, so it's hard to do. Let me take one of them out. And I'm going to sew right on that diagonal line. Put the pin back in. Here's my general foot. I like to use my number 20 foot where I can see a little bit more of what's going on here. And if you're wondering, I have a beautiful Bernina Aurora 430 machine that I absolutely adore. Nothing beats a Bernina. I call it my dirty Harry of sewing machines. It can do anything. Make sure that I have my thread going backwards, and I'm just going to line myself up here. Needle down. And back stitch. And then you can see when I open it up, look at the beautiful strip I have. And all I need to do is cut this back part away now, which I'll do in a second. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and cut that back part away. I like to kind of cut up here. Little points off also. I've got a nice flat open edge, and I'm going to iron this open. Just a quick little iron here. Like that. Okay, I have all my strips now nicely sewn together, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay them out and fold them over and iron them closed. So somebody should create a tool to make this job easier. If you're an entrepreneur out there, there's a tool you could make. And as you can see, I'm just going to go all the way down the length of my binding, making it nice and straight, and it's now done in half. And I'll just continue on until all of it's done. Okay, so one of the things I like to do is I like to lay my quilt on my bed and just make sure that the binding is actually going to fit all the way around it. There's nothing worse than starting to sew your binding on and finding out you needed more. So I just start in the middle and I just kind of am laying it around. You'll notice that my binding is matching my outer border of these little green quilts that I'm making. I will also tell you that this quilt is probably going to be going to Project Linus, which I'm very excited about. This is going to be my first Project Linus quilt. It's kind of an exciting thing for me. I've done lots of quilts as gifts, and donations to charities, but this is my first Project Linus. So as you can see, I have way more binding than I need. I will probably just snip that off. But I also have a good 12 inches of overlay, which I definitely want 12 inches of overlay. Okay, now that I know that it fits all the way around, I'll take it to the sewing machine and we'll start sewing. Okay, I have this beautiful little 1/4 inch foot that I really like on my machine. So I'll put my 1/4 inch foot on, thread in the back, and I'm going to sew on the top of my quilt. Make sure again that I'm leaving a big long tail, and I'm going to start with that tail hanging off the back. I don't know if you can see, I've got a nice tail hanging off the back still. I'm going to move this so I'm needle down, and so we're going to just start sewing. As you can see, I've come to the end of my quilt, so what I'm going to do is make sure that I sew up to the 1/4 inch mark. Really, I'm eyeballing it. Who knows if it's actually a 1/4 inch or not, but it's about there. I'm going to back stitch with my needle, cut my thread. Okay. Then I'm going to bring this whole guy around, and I'm going to fold my fabric up like at a diagonal, and then back down. So it's kind of looking like this on the inside of it, but it's folded down. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to show you, I found these little clips and I love these guys. They're not needles. I am not going to poke myself. Not that I've ever poked myself. Ha 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 ha. So I'm going to clip that guy down and back under my machine. And I'm going to start 1/4 inch from the end of the quilt, just like this line is 1/4 inch, so that my needle is coming down about 1/4 inch. And back stitch, and off I go. So as you can see, I've stopped stitching at the point at which I've got lots of open space. And I'm going to go ahead and take this guy up off my machine. Now, I will warn you, this is the hardest and trickiest part of binding, and it takes a little bit of practice to get good at it. So be patient with yourself as you learn how to do this. So what you're going to do is, the idea is the same one when we were joining the clips beforehand. So I want to open up my binding on this side and open up my binding on this side, and I want to find the place that these two guys meet exactly. I'm trying to get them to lay flat along the edges very nicely, and at one point these two guys will meet right here. I hope you guys can see that well. Now, I've seen the trick where you put a pin through it, and that's the place that those two guys meet. I always have a hard time with that, seeing that later. So I try and use my trusty blue pen, and I figure out where these guys meet. I stick my pen in between them and I mark them off. And now I've got a little blue dot and a little blue dot. Okay. Then lay this guy flat, and I want to match up to fold him in here. Right where my blue dot is again, and I'm going to lay him right on top, match up my blue dots. So this should look familiar. It was exactly how we joined our pieces earlier. And I'm going to pin, and then I'm going to find that pencil I had earlier, or the blue pen, which is fine too. And I'm going to mark off the straight line between these two pieces of fabric. Everything tends to want to shift and move when you're doing this, so don't be surprised. And I'm sure there are others out here who do this much better than I do, but this is just me. I'm going to mark a blue line. You could use a pencil, it doesn't really matter. It's just what I have handy. I can see that blue line. You probably can't see that super great on the video, but trust me, it's there. It only matters if you can see it, not other people. I've pinned in between the two, and now I'm going to sew them on. I'm going to put this guy back under my machine, make sure I'm lining up my needle right on that blue line, and I'm lining up this guy right at my 0 point mark. Needle down. Now, if all went correctly, I should be able to open this back up and it will lay flat now. And even though I've got little guys hanging out of it, it is going to lay flat when I've cut those guys off. Now, I always recommend before you start cutting off your tails, make sure that this does it right, because sometimes something can go awry and you end up with a wonky sew line. And if you needed to, you could always rip it out and do it again, which the first time you do it, you will need to do that at least once or twice. But now that I know it's going to lay flat, I cut off my little tags. And voila! I'm ready to sew this down all the way now. Pause. So I'm just going to put it back under my machine and sew the rest of the binding on it. Nicely sewed together. As you can see, I'm going to have a little bubble here, and I don't care. I'll just sew right over it. It's going to disappear in a minute anyways. And now all my binding is sewn on to the front of my quilt. So now my binding is all sewn down on the front of my quilt. I'm going to lay it on my lap here. Honestly, I usually lay in my bed and do this. Some people like to sew this down on a zigzag stitch or try and stitch in the ditch on their machine. I find this a relaxing part of my quilt making, so I like to hand stitch it. So I'm gonna use my little clip here again, and I saw somebody use this little trick and I really like it. So I'm just gonna do like 3 little stitches here. 1, 2. So I have my little knot here now made. And I'm going to fold it back over, and I'm going to take a little piece of the quilt and a little bit of the binding, just the edge of it, if I can get it, and pull. Little edge of the quilt, the edge of the binding, pull through. Edge of the quilt, edge of the binding, pull through. Okay, I'm going to take you to the end here so you can see how to do the corner. I go all the way to the corner as far as I can get on this quilt. Okay, and then I'm going to take my clip off, turn my quilt, make it a little easier for myself, and fold this guy over. Wrong direction. Okay. And put my clip back down. Okay. You can see my nice, pretty mitered corner now. I just have to sew it in place. So I grab a little bit of the underneath and come straight up as much as I can. And then I do that a second time. And now my corner's down, and I'm ready to grab a little piece and come up through my binding. And now my corner's down. Move my clip down. And now I'll just continue around until I have gone all the way around the quilt. And this is our finished quilt. As you can see, all the binding is done. It looks very nice, a little bit different on the outside. This quilt's gonna get that puffy appearance that we like so much after it's been washed. What's nice about these quilts is that they're all made, at least mine are, they're all made with 100% cotton fabrics, so they are very durable. I throw them in the wash, into the dryer, and they'll be beautiful. Thanks for watching, and come back and see other videos.